Once again, thank you for joining today's lightning talk, as I've been calling them, focusing on the 101 of startups. And this is an introduction to the startup ecosystem, primarily geared towards professionals and folks who are in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. I see there are some folks, including some relatives, great to see you guys, who are here from outside of that industry. So just to provide that context, but nonetheless, I certainly strive to be accessible enough that even someone who's coming in without that deep industry expertise could still benefit from the content of this conversation and of this talk. So if at any point in time, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll basically try to go through this in about 15 to 20 minutes to reserve about a good 10 minutes for discussion and answering any questions that you have. So do keep note of them, drop them in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to discuss them. So first off, just want to introduce myself. Hey, everybody. So I'm Michael. Nice to meet you all, and thank you again for joining. I'm an architect, as well as, I guess, a product and technology leader in the industry. I've been around the block a few times. I've worked on a few different continents. The logos on the bottom right of the screen are just a handful of places that I've worked throughout my career, teaching at Columbia University, Pratt Institute, where I studied architecture, as well as the American University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. And as well as a number of architecture studios and startups. So Studio V Art Design and Planning, working on projects like this, Empire Stores on the Brooklyn waterfront in Dumbo, and Adjay Associates primarily working on their 130 William Street residential tower in Lower Manhattan, at firms like Ennead Architects, where I worked on the Shanghai Planetarium project, as well as then startups like WeWork, where I led the architecture team in their enterprise division. And of course, lastly, at Juno, where I've been focusing on accelerating the construction of more sustainable housing with mass timber and developing the technology to facilitate that happening as efficiently as possible. So that's a little bit about me. And actually, not too long before jumping on the call, I realized actually that another fun fact about myself, I've been a DJ for a long time, and I've actually DJ'd at, I think, 6 of the 8 places that are listed on where I've worked, with the exception of, I think, Pratt and Ennead are the only places where I haven't DJ'd. And ironically, the folks at Pratt asked me if I would DJ their end of year celebration tomorrow, which I can't, unfortunately, but I would have gotten another one off the list. But anyway, that's a little bit about me. So let's talk about the objectives of today's workshop, of which there are 4. So the first is to really differentiate between traditional AEC firms and startups, really highlighting the key distinctions in both their structure, their culture, and in my opinion, their innovation potential. Number 2, to introduce you all to the startup lifecycle, as well as a really important framework called the Lean Startup Methodology, which will help you to understand both the stages and principles that drive startup success. Our third objective today is to identify the critical mindset shifts that are necessary, I believe, again, this is my opinion, in a startup environment, and really contrasting them with the kind of skills and perspectives that are, I think, more naturally cultivated in traditional practice. And lastly, my goal and objective here is to inspire you and also to empower you to explore the possibilities of architecture, engineering, and construction startups, and to equip you with the beginnings of the foundational knowledge that you would need or will be helpful to you in navigating this space. So starting with traditional practice and this contrasting with startups. So traditional architectural practice, right, focuses primarily on what I'll describe as customized services, customized services and project-based work. I think while, of course, the architecture industry yields really phenomenal and amazing built environments, at the same time, it's a model that struggles to scale. At the same time, that model is pretty well established. So there isn't a ton of incentive to really break out and kind of discover new models altogether, while at the same time, the established model of architecture is particularly vulnerable to typical market kind of cycles. So you kind of get the boom and bust of various different typologies. I think you can say a lot of folks in the multifamily market right now are feeling that as the cost of capital with interest rates rising, causing a bit of a squeeze there. So just some key bullet points here, so many of which many of us know, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page. That in traditional practice, we're focusing heavily on, excuse me. on bespoke design solutions, which make it difficult to standardize processes, and particularly for the purpose of scaling those services efficiently. Secondly, the industry's focus on kind of one-off bespoke projects also leads to a pretty fragmented workflow between firms and between stakeholders. And lastly, that the stability and established norms of traditional practice can create a bit of a risk-averse culture that leads to an environment where folks, particularly firm leaders, may be hesitant to embrace more disruptive innovations and new business models, somewhat naturally, because those models may actually cannibalize some of the, let's say, aspects of their practice that are quite successful that they want to protect, if not nurture and grow. So I wanted to really double click quickly on this point about customized services not scaling, and unpacking a little bit what I mean by that. So in terms of scale, meaning for every unit of production or output, let's say design, let's call it square foot of space that's designed, right? In traditional practice, in any with any stakeholder in the AEC ecosystem who's delivering customized services, for every amount of growth in the amount of square footage likely that you want to deliver, you need some proportion of additional people power in order to do that. And so that's what I mean primarily by this thing doesn't scale. If you want to deliver more space, you need more person power. And so there's a very tight and correlated relationship between those two. Contrasting that with, say, products or things that are more scalable, right? You can deliver some value to a customer or stakeholder without the commensurate or equal growth in the amount of person power required to deliver that value. And so there's an interesting ladder for how, particularly when it comes to customized services, which is the world that many of us, deal with in the AEC industry, how you can begin to shift from purely customized services and make your way up toward a more product-based delivery model. And the huge component of that, of course, is the use of technology. And so customized services really lives on the low end of the use of technology, and the benefits can be a bit constrained in terms of scalability. But let's take an example of, let's say, a software tool like Cove Tool. And everyone may or may not be familiar with Cove Tool. So just to very succinctly call it what it is, Cove Tool is a software product that enables architects and engineers to perform various types of sustainability analyses on their projects, right? So let's take Cove Tool as an example of how you might step up the ladder towards a more scalable product. Now, I don't know if this is actually how Cove Tool started, but this is me just projecting a little bit about what's possible. So Cove Tool may have had the goal of creating a software product that helps architects and engineers to perform sustainability and various types of sustainability analyses. But they may have started out by providing customized services as a consultant, right? They can be a consultant that provides on a project basis services to run those analyses and create those reports for a practice. As they're doing that, however, to get to the next step of the ladder, they can begin to create systems and tools and try to systemize the way that they deliver that customized service, ultimately making it a little bit more scalable, but they're primarily using internal tools. And as they continue to do that, they may then bring on some of their customers as, let's say, development partners, where they begin to then, offer some of that to their customers as a product, right? And so they can begin to shift from the purely customized service to productized services, or sometimes called tech-enabled services, and ultimately then step up to the third rung of ladder of being able to produce a full-on third-party product that their previous customized services customers can use on their own, which is way more scalable than what they would than the customized services model. And the last piece, the top of the ladder, really is where you're then able to actually come back and provide value-add customized services on top of your product. You see this a lot with particularly enterprise software, as it's called, with large companies where, let's take something like, well, let's just stick with Cove Tool as an example. So Cove Tool, you have, it's being deployed within a practice and various designers and architects are using it. But Cove Tool may provide some additional service on top of that to help with implementation, turbocharging the usage and utilization within the firm, things that are not as scalable, but it's on top of the scalable product. So anyhow, that's like an example of how the progression can happen from customized services to products, and ultimately delivering your product as a service with customized services on top. All that, though, we're still talking about the realm of traditional practice, some of the constraints and why it's difficult to create more scalable impact, and the example of Cove tools about kind of how that can happen. But now to shift a bit more to the explicit world of startups, which truly is a whole new world. And so as in the example that I just gave, by leveraging technology, by being, I think, a bit more experimental in terms of the business models that they're pursuing, being far more agile in the methodologies that they use, right? Startups can begin to rethink and potentially revolutionize industries to drive transformative change. The image on the right actually is a picture of the garage in which Google started back in the late 90s. And I think what's kind of interesting about that is even the space that I'm in right now used to look like that. I guess it makes me feel a little bit posh in all sincerity, but yeah, this used to be my old beat up garage, which is now my home studio. And we'll see if anything that is within sniffing distance of Google comes out of this place, but that would be pretty amazing. Anywho, I just want to turn the tables back to you all in the audience here, just as we get started with getting oriented around terms and definitions. How would you define a startup? And I would really love if kind of one or two people maybe would just share their thoughts, initial thoughts on how they might define a startup. Feel free to unmute yourself and yeah, just it's a bit of a cold call.
Hey, Michael, what's up, man? I'm gonna chime in right here. Thanks for organizing this. I'll define a startup as a person or a group of people trying to solve a pain point in someone's life, right? That's really, and they want to scale that solution to address everyone's pain point.
Yeah, definitely. That solving a specific problem, that pain point, is a really critical aspect. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? One other person maybe want to chime in with how they might define a startup?
Yeah, I'll jump in and add that it's also, I think, often searching for a business model or testing out different business models to see what sticks and what can scale well.
Indeed, yes. Thank you very much for adding that, Ben. Yeah. So I totally agree. It's about that search, particularly that verb, I think is really important. And so there's a definition of a startup that I really love. It was, I guess, published by this guy's name's Eric Rice. He's really the kind of founder and the kind of leader behind the lean startup movement. And the definition that he's put out of what a startup is a human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And particularly that part about extreme uncertainty is really important, because if the conditions aren't uncertain, then in many ways you're starting something that is pretty known and established. And really what your biggest risk is your ability to execute against a known model, right? But in a startup, you're fundamentally operating under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And so that searching that Ben just called out becomes really important. You have to figure out and search, how you're solving a customer's problem in an effective way. You have to search and find and iterate on how you develop the business model that leads to a sustainable and scalable solution. But that extreme uncertainty is a really important characteristic that I think very aptly defines what a startup is. And fundamentally, what that triggers for me, and a framing that I found to be very helpful in thinking about startups, is that startups are temporary. Right, back to click on Ben's usage of the term searching. Right, a startup is founded, right, again, in conditions of extreme uncertainty. There's a hypothesis about how you can solve a pain point or a problem in some customer or some person's life or world, and hopefully there are a lot of people who have that problem, and you can create a scalable solution to that problem. At the same time, you're going through the process of searching for the correct problem definition, the solution development, being able to iterate and develop an ability to deliver that solution to that customer in a way that is sustainable for your business. Likewise, the profit formula that needs to be involved to make sure that that's all sustainable as a company. All of this is happening very quickly, very iteratively in this searching fashion. And it's all happening during the whole kind of phase where the company is, or the startup rather, is very much still temporary, right? It's not until you cross the threshold of having been able to define that problem, create that solution, figure out how to deliver it in a scalable way. Not only deliver it in a scalable way, but begin to ramp up your execution to effectively capture the market share that you think you can in your plan, and even begin to dial and refine things from there. It's only after you get through all of that that you kind of, cross the threshold into the promised land of being a mature company, right? Airbnb once upon a time was a startup, but today they're not, right? They are a mature company, but they absolutely went through this whole phase successfully and were able to cross that. But this notion that startups are temporary is a really important one, because it totally shapes, frankly, a lot of the big shifts culturally between traditional practice environments versus the startup environment. Okay. So with that in mind, I just want to, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job here if I didn't kind of just give you the real math on startups though, right? Because startups can be very alluring, they're very exciting, things move fast, but we need to understand the reality of just statistically what we're talking about in terms of success rates and things of that nature. So 75% of startups, this is a study that was done by Stanford's Graduate School of Business, fail to return any return on investment to their early investors, right? Statistically speaking, there is a 75%, right? 3 out of 4 startups fail without making any kind of meaningful return for their investors. 60% of founders who are the CEOs of their startups lose their job, or not necessarily leave the company, but maybe are no longer the CEO by the time they get to, I'll call it, their 4th or 5th round of funding. That's pretty sobering. And I actually recall, Justin, I see you're here. You may have been part of the all hands when I brought that up during one of our all hands at Juno, which also speaks to the environment of trust that we have there, that I was pointing out to the CEO that it's very likely that you're going to lose your job, statistically speaking. And he was very receptive to the feedback. Anywho, and lastly, that 65% of startups, frankly, fail due to co-founder conflict. Many startups are founded by groups of individuals, and that chemistry and that ability to grow throughout that journey, or inability rather, is a significant source of failure. All right. Yet at the same time, so many folks continue to pursue this path, myself included. I share these statistics while being extremely excited about startups, right? And actually, just seeing the time here, I'm actually going to skip over some of this to get to the meat here. This is a lot of background, and I want to make sure that we get to some key things. Anyhow, regardless of those sobering statistics, the reality is, though, when startups win, they can and do often win very big. So looking at some research of companies that were founded between 1979 and 2013, 43% of those companies were backed by venture capital. So they were venture-backed startups. And of those, that 43% of companies, today, these are companies who are currently public, who were founded at that time. Those companies contribute 57% to the total market capitalization of all of those companies. So statistically speaking, they're punching above their weight in terms of the value that they're delivering in the public markets. But what's really impressive is that of those, again, 43% of companies who were venture backed who are now public, they actually account for 82% of all of the research and development spending in the public companies, right? Again, of this cohort. So there's a heavy investment in continued advancement in R&D and innovation from those companies. I'll go ahead and skip over this again as well. So from there, let's talk a little bit. That's a bit more about the startup as maybe a bit of an abstract entity. Some of the statistics around success and failure rates. But let's talk about the lived experience and kind of what that looks and feels like. So we have some key entrepreneurial growth stages within a startup. And I like to use the example of, let's say, like a Chipotle for reference. So the first stage is really the inventor. And that's when someone has to kind of invent the burrito, right? Someone has to invent the thing that is some new form of value in the market or in the world. The second stage is what I'm calling the systemizer, whether or not that's even a word or term. But that is, okay, someone's invented something really magical, right? But it's still like creating a custom bespoke kind of thing. How do you create the systems and processes and protocols around that to even begin making that deliverable in a systematic fashion? Once you've done that, once you now have the first restaurant or the first cohort of restaurants, and you see that it's working, now comes the scaler, right? And now you believe that there's a big market. And from there, you now want to push and focus on expanding your business into new markets and new customer segments to be able to deliver that value, again, to capture that market share that you believe you could early on and at the outset. And the last piece is the calibrator. And so once you've expanded into the market and your solution's out there, there's a lot of refinement that's required and necessary and tweaking to really dialing in how the actual portfolio of your product and the usage is performing. And this is essentially kind of where companies get teed up to either be acquired or ultimately kind of go public, right? And those are the 4 stages. Now, the reason why these are important is these reflect 2 very, 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 very different startup experiences. The inventor and systemizer stage is what I'll call kind of the 0 to 1 stage. You start off with the idea and you have to figure out how to systemize it and even how to invent the idea. And that is very much about quick, fast learning, being very iterative, getting customer feedback, and moving very aggressively to get to that solution of 1. The scaler and calibrator experience is very much the kind of 1 to N. You figured out how things work, and now you're going to push that forward. And the end is basically like, how big do you really want to make this? I'm recognizing that we're pretty tight on time, so I'm going to try to be a bit tighter with this. This is the first one of these, so I'll calibrate accordingly and also try to dial in the content in the future. Regardless, I think this is a pretty useful chart here just to kind of to talk about that. I think WeWork's story is pretty well known. I'll just very quickly point out that the early stages here on the graph are the 0 to 1 stage. Of course, probably the 1.5 billion to this peak here is the scalar 1 to N stage. And I think all the turbulence that you see at the end there is really the calibration happening too late, the calibration happening by the market and not happening internally in order to prepare to go public. So anyway, so let's dig in quickly to the lean startup methodology. I'll go a bit faster here. And there are 5 core concepts that I want you guys to be aware of, and we'll dig into 2 of them briefly before we come to a close. The first concept is this notion of a minimum viable product. And this is really important because the whole lean startup methodology is just founded on the premise of how do you validate your hypotheses and about how you expect to deliver value for a customer with as little waste as possible. What is the most skeletal, minimal thing you can create that delivers on the promise of what you're trying to achieve so that you can validate the learning and ultimately build on top of that. So the MVP is a really important concept. The second is the build and measure, learn feedback loop, which we'll talk about more in detail in a second. And the second is this notion of validated learning. Intuition, hunches, going with your gut, building out products based on what you kind of think, kind of building it, hoping that they will come. Time and time again, this has been demonstrated even statistically to lead to a lot of failure in the startup ecosystem. The fourth here, which we'll also dig into briefly on the cultural piece, is the pivot or persevere. And this ties very closely to the build, measure, learn feedback loop, the need to change or whether or not if your hypothesis has been validated to push forward with it. And the last piece is around innovation accounting. And this is about being very precise about the metrics that you're tracking to truly understand whether or not you're making progress on delivering value for your customer, not metrics that kind of just make you feel good, like, oh, the number of page visits to your website, which doesn't really tell you all that much when the real value comes when someone actually uses the product that you're delivering. Okay, so I can see here, just want to be respectful of everyone's time, and this is the first time I'm doing this, so we're coming up on 30 minutes here. I think I probably have another 5 or 10 minutes worth of content that I can go through, but just want to do a quick gut check on whether or not folks can stick around for 5 or 10 minutes, or whether we can maybe take a little bit of a pause and open it up for questions. I do want to hear from you guys as and not just kind of go on this kind of monologue throughout this lightning talk. Any thoughts there? Okay, I'll just go through this as efficiently as I can and kind of just get to the open dialogue portion. But so just expanding a little bit on the lean startup methodology and the importance of this build, measure, learn feedback loop. So again, coupling this with the notion of the minimum viable product, you can start off with certain ideas at the top, and you want to get to a product. And even when that product is out in the world, you then would get some data about how it's being used. But the actual activities that you need to undertake are the things that are in between. So of course, one kind of the build piece, actually building out a skeletal falsifiable experiment to test your hypothesis and getting those into the hands of your customers as quickly as possible, empirically measuring the outcome of that experiment, and rigorously learning what you need to do in order to go through that loop again, and essentially iterating and repeating. And what that looks like in the larger context of developing a product in kind of the evolution of a startup also ties to this notion of pivoting or persevering. Now, contrary to traditional businesses where the model is relatively established, I'll just speak from my own experience. I think for a lot of you folks as well, in traditional practice, things don't change all that much that rapidly, right? Things are fairly easygoing, and sure, there's volatility in terms of how the markets change, but they're a bit slower. At a startup, that pace and rate of change is probably on the total opposite side of the spectrum. I think a lot of folks, when they enter into startups, can feel like things are constantly changing, they're constantly evolving. There might even be some desire to have a plan and stick to the plan and just execute on that plan for a longer period of time. But that shift and that change and that dynamism is a feature and not a bug of the startup environment. And I hope that that's becoming clearer as we discuss the kind of build, measure, learn feedback loop. Because as you build things, measure them, and learn from them, you are either getting confirming evidence that you are on the right path, therefore you will keep going. But more often than not, our initial hypotheses are wrong. And so you're going to learn from that, and you need to then shift and pivot. And so that shifting and pivoting and searching, right, going back to Ben's, the term that Ben used really early on, is what leads to that pivoting and that persevering. And a lot of that, what can feel like volatility, but it's purposeful volatility, because ideally you're learning in the process. And so that is something that really contributes to the overall atmosphere and culture of pace, speed, learning, agility in a startup. But again, it's purposeful because you're searching for that business model that works. Coming to a close here to talk a little bit about the key mindset shifts that I think are really important for architects and engineers and designers to embody when shifting into that kind of environment that have some of these dynamics that I just described. One of the really important things I find is to focus on outcomes. I believe that, in my experience, particularly with folks who maybe have less exposure to clients or limited exposure to clients, there can be a heavy emphasis and focus on the kind of core three elements here on the lower portion of this graph: the outputs, the drawings, things of that nature, the specifications, and so on, presentations, the activities that go into that, and also the resources that contribute, of course, to making all of those things happen. When all of those outputs, activities, and resources are being put together and assembled to effectuate some outcome on behalf of some likely external stakeholder, and that outcome ultimately translates into some kind of impact that happens out in the world or in the project or somewhere. And being able to connect your activities and outputs to the outcomes and impact that has on other people, and being able to make that connection very explicitly and having that focus is incredibly important when shifting into the startup environment. Because as we saw before with the build, measure, learn feedback loop, it's not so much about measuring or learning whether or not your activities are right, but whether or not the outcomes that you expect to happen for your customers are actually taking place, right? And it's all focused on that. The second and last piece here is this notion of picking your head up. It can be, I don't want to say easy, but there can be so much that goes on within a project environment, the complexity of a project, that you can kind of really narrow your focus on the part of the project that you are responsible for and really dig in on that. I think, though, both in architectural practice, but I think also, especially at startups, it's really important and critical to pick your head up and to be aware of the adjacent stakeholders and their priorities and the different activities that are happening for them, as well as with different durations of time. Having that kind of court vision and having that awareness of the context in which you're working in, I think will be valuable to anyone, even in traditional practice, but in startups, it's essential, because as you're iterating and pivoting and persevering so frequently, it's important to ensure that the work that you're doing is aligned with the evolution that's happening with all of those adjacent stakeholders. Okay, so coming to a close here, just a summary of the key takeaways here. So number one, that traditional architecture firms, AEC firms, and startups really differ fundamentally in their structure. The culture also, structure culture, as well as, I would argue, their innovation potential, particularly because startups can leverage technology and agile methodologies specifically to drive scalable change. And I really want to underscore the term scalable. The second takeaway, that the lean startup methodology provides really a great framework for startup success, emphasizing a culture of experimentation, rapid iteration, and specifically validated learning through the build, measure, learn feedback loop, as we discussed. Number three, that adopting an outcomes-oriented mindset is really crucial, I believe, for AEC startups, AEC professionals to drive really meaningful impact and frankly exceed stakeholder expectations and ultimately demonstrate the true value of their work. And lastly, picking your head up. That contextual awareness is super important. I have recruited and hired so many architects into both of my startup roles over the last 7 years. And something that I've always asked and looked for in those interviews has been their ability to tell me not just what they did, but the contextual, the context within which they were working and how what they did influenced that context. That core vision was just really important. So this notion of picking your head up, looking beyond your immediate focus to identify opportunities, collaborate across domains, is really an important skill that will help you to discover and innovate on new ways to drive value in the world. So to close here, of course, this is part of a larger course that I'm putting together called Break into AEC Startups. I just want to let you all hear this from my own mouth and the reason why I built this course. For me, I've been in this role for about 6 or 7 years, and particularly at a time when a lot of architects I felt were kind of moving into this space. And many of us have, had varying degrees of success in this space, but there was no playbook. There were no big brothers or sisters to look up to say, hey, what should I be looking out for here? How should I negotiate this? What's a 409A? My equity package? What does that mean? There was no playbook. So, taking a moment to take a step back and reflect, I want to help you and others who are interested in this space with that playbook that myself and many others who I've spoken to about this absolutely wish that we had when we entered into this space. Because I think that would not only help you find startup roles that are or startups whose missions really inspire you and that you align with, but ultimately help you to negotiate your way into those places as effectively as possible to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. So just some key dates there. The next cohort starts in a couple of weeks on May 10th. Enrollment closes the night before at midnight. So yeah, do check it out. You'll likely get an email about that from me pretty soon. And yeah, thanks for joining this lightning talk. Really appreciate your time. So I did want to reserve some time for comments and questions. I'm good to chat until the top of the hour. I know that we're over on time, so I totally understand that folks need to drop off. But yeah, if there are any burning questions that anyone has, I'm more than happy to field them. I actually should take a look at the chat. All right. All right. All good. I see some great comments in here. No questions. A lot of folks are appreciative of the content. I really appreciate that feedback. Yeah. So I'll bring you guys back here. I'll stop sharing. Awesome. Well, last call for questions? Could I briefly cover the cohort? Thanks, Ben. Could I briefly cover the cohort? Sure. So the cohort, I found personally throughout my own professional development journeys, various journeys, that particularly cohort-based learning is particularly effective for a variety of reasons. Number one, you have a whole slew of accountability partners that you're going through an experience with. Not only that, I do believe even in the way that you just asked this question, having that live engagement and interaction with me or any instructor is also super helpful. So that convening forum is, I think, highly valuable for truly embodying and engaging with certain content to really make it actionable. Ideally, that's solely dependent on the content, right? To achieve the goals that you want to achieve. So that's kind of one reason why, in thinking about how I wanted to help folks, I didn't opt for kind of recording a bunch of videos and making it self-paced, but trying to create something where there's also a community of people as well that come together. So you also have a network of folks who are also interested in pursuing similar types of transitions, and so that can also continue to cultivate those ties, and you guys can continue to support one another as you discover opportunities and make an impact in the AEC startup ecosystem. Does that answer your question, Lucia?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to, I'm very interested. I just wanted to, if you had something besides the presentation, which was great, thank you. If there was something else that maybe could inform more of like the, what we would experience throughout this cohort for 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I can expand on that a bit. So the 2 week course, essentially, there are kind of four big goals. First goal is how do you turn I don't want to call it a game, but turn the exercise of finding a startup that really resonates with you, turn that from a game of chance. I think the ecosystem's evolved in a way where they're kind of like job boards and stuff like that that are kind of evolving now, but that's still largely based on luck, I would argue. And two, the vast majority, not the vast majority, but a significant percentage of roles in startups are not publicized. I did not apply for my role at WeWork through some job portal, nor did I. And even when I went to Juno, I was introduced to the founders months before a role even existed, and we were talking, and then suddenly we saw ways that we can help each other, and then that's kind of how that journey started. And so I want to help folks understand how to map the ecosystem and understand who's out there so that you can start to make the connections to get to those next stages. So yeah, that's kind of one of the big goals. How do you find the startups that you're excited about and that whose missions you are passionate about helping them to fulfill and bring to the world? That's number one. Number two, as I've just describing, to help you with the tools to become really effective at the practice and exercise of informational interviewing. Just that kind of casual back and forth where the stakes aren't as high, but you can really learn a lot about what people are up to and what they're trying to achieve, and also help them understand a bit more about you in a pretty low stakes way that I found to be very effective at getting to basically going in through the side door to ultimately get to like the interview for the actual role. That's number two. Number three is all about, what's number three? I'm forgetting my own curriculum now. So it kind of often happens when you're, it's not up in front of me, but the third piece, so create your ecosystem map. The third piece is this outcomes orientation that we spoke about during this course. I want to help folks with more tactical, more tactics to help them start to connect the things that they've done in practice to a more outcomes and impact orientation. That's really critical. In the startup world, kind of just executing activities is not all that valuable. The question that the notion that we talk about all the time at Juno and other startups is, what's the so what? Okay, you did this, but so what? What's the outcome? What's the impact? And I want to help you and others basically with the tactics about how you kind of get from here's what I did to here's the outcome and impact that it had, and helping to become really fluid in how you discuss that, which will help you in that interview process. And the last piece is all about negotiation and due diligence. And that's probably the biggest piece that I wish I knew more about early on. I've been pretty lucky, but nonetheless, suddenly there are different things that are on the table: equity, total compensation packages, various options of equity. You have to understand risk, like all this kind of stuff. And so I want to very succinctly help you all understand how to equip you with some tools to evaluate those very effectively and very quickly, just so that you can make the decisions that are most appropriate for whatever your goals are. What I found in my experience, and also speaking with a lot of friends who also went through this transition, there's just a tremendous information asymmetry particularly when you're transitioning into startups. And not only that, but founders and founding teams, by definition, really have to be very charismatic storytellers. So you have both the information asymmetry and you're engaging with someone who is a very great storyteller who can sell a vision. And so you're just primed for not making a well-informed decision. And I want to change that. I want to help you with the tools to kind of like level the playing field and conduct your due diligence effectively, again, to negotiate effectively to achieve your goals. So that's a bit of a double click, a deeper dive, Lucia, into the key modules of the course. And that's what we'll cover. And we'll also do 2 projects that give you like 2 very tangible assets that you can take to go ahead and go out there and make the change.
Okay, thank you very much. And just last question, that more like personal like work, like one-to-one, that happens during office hours?
Yes, during office hours, but also during each workshop session, we'll have time like this as well. It won't just kind of be packed end to end with content. there'll also be, of course, plenty of opportunity for back and forth and engagement. But yes, if you want more one-to-one personal conversations, yeah, I also have office hours each week.
Okay. Is there more of a long-term later, like kind of like, will there be possibilities to keep having feedback from you?
Sure.
After? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I've just spent so many years having these kinds of conversations with various architects and engineers, and it's been a bit sporadic and informal, and it's harder to do that in a continuous way. But for sure, I think anyone absolutely who goes through the course, yeah, you always have access to me. You can always ping me for any advice or things like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quick question. What would you say are the top 3 differences between a startup environment and a traditional firm for someone who's on the edge to decide where they want to go, if they want to go in that direction or not?
Sure. One is cultural. And I think I tried to call it out. I think we just might have tried a little bit later in the call, maybe. Yeah. But I call out this notion that startups are temporary. I think all business are theoretically temporary. You have to kind of, fight to stay alive. But startups particularly are founded on an extremely uncertain premise. Therefore, you have to, as I would often say with my colleagues, the name of the game is innovate or die. That's it. That's the only choice. And so when you're in that kind of environment, you have to move quickly. You have to iterate fast. You have to be radically open to feedback and change. And so it just forces this kind of dynamic where you have to really go after validated learnings, be super agile, and move very, very fast. For as long as I've been in this space, in any company that I've been part of, we being folks who have been in these environments, just recognize that time just moves differently in these spaces. 1 year of calendar time in a traditional office is probably about 4 years, if not more, in a startup environment, because the amount of decisions and iterations and things that you have to do in the same period of time is just that much greater. So that's kind of one piece there. The second, I would say, is around ownership and agency. Now, I say that with a little bit of hesitation because my hope is, I think a lot of firm owners would want employees to operate with a sense of ownership and agency. That's my hope. I think, though, in speaking with a lot of folks who are on the front lines of executing projects, a lot of folks don't feel that. Now, at startups, that's the name of the game. There is no other alternative. Again, back to this notion of startups being temporary, and that's why that framing was just so important for me. It came later for me, but it helped to put things into perspective. And so that agency and ownership, and having to own the outcomes and and working with the team to define what those desired outcomes are, is also a big shift. Because of course it comes with a lot of responsibility, but the agency is also really empowering. What else? What other cultural shifts there? I think also probably, again, architects, I believe, are very super collaborative professionals, but that really gets ramped up on steroids at a startup because suddenly the way that the functions are organized is less around the domain expertise of architects and kind of sub-expertise around project management, let's say kind of technical considerations in design, but it's more now design, engineering in various capacities, if it's like a hardware and software startup, product as its own capital thing, marketing and business development, all these things have to come together. Back to my point about picking up your head, you have to be aware of all these pieces and how they all work together. And so the way you collaborate and that kind of, all of a sudden this notion of being quote unquote cross-functional becomes really important. So even that I found to be just incredibly edifying, frankly. And I've just learned a lot. One thing I'll say about that is for several years now, I've given this lecture at Columbia University's graduate school about real estate finance and startup finance. And I think what's striking to me about the fact that I was ever asked to give that talk or even invited back to give that talk is I have zero formal training in those things. But I know and understand those things pretty well because of what I'm describing to you, the cross-functional nature of working, picking your head up and being aware of what's happening, what we're doing with design and technology influences the real estate metrics and kind of what the goals that we're trying to achieve there and how that influences delivery and construction and the different factors, how all those things come together. That proximity, that speed, that rubbing up against each other in that kind of way is what has enabled me to be expert enough, right, to deliver an effective lecture year over year about the specifics of real estate finance and how it works, as well as the startup, the way that financing works in startups, at least when they're venture backed. So yeah, that kind of it's a different kind of collaboration, I would say. Yeah. So those are some of the biggest shifts, all of which I find to be very energizing, but also just contribute to significant personal and professional growth.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm happy to field more questions. I really love all the questions, great questions. But I know we're well over on time. I deeply appreciate everyone joining, the folks who had to drop off and everyone. But
hey, Michael, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Will you be doing this again?
This particular talk?
Yeah.
I think I'll need to. I think I'll need to do it again. But my plan actually was to host 3 lightning talks between now and when the course launches. The next lightning talk that I have teed up is Venture Capital 101.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So-
Because I was about to ask you, like, can you elaborate on like what a series is?
Oh yeah.
Right, like a series pre-seed, and like some people might not know that, but like
Totally.
I get those questions saying like, well, a pre-seed is this, friends and family is this,
Right.
But then that'll tell you, like, that's also to me like kind of an important part for if you want to get into startup world, like what series of company do you want to get into, right? Because then that informs what your payout at the end might be.
Absolutely. Your payout, the kind of experience, you're totally right about that.
Mhm.
Yes. So that is the next lightning talk. Thank you for teeing that up.
Nice.
Yes, to connect those dots on the capital and financing side and how they mesh with what we discussed, I spoke about the 0 to 1 experience. So that's like your pre-seed to, let's call it maybe Series A. And then your scaler is kind of, Series B onward, right? And how to understand where companies are in their fundraising cycle and what that signals to you about where they are or should be in terms of those different stages and what that means for your experience. Yeah, that's definitely all things that I'll try to keep it slim because I have clearly tried to pack too much in the 30 minutes here, but
No, that's awesome, man. I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I want to, the reason why I was asking is because I want to invite some of my other architecture friends who actually went to Pratt as well.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, I was like telling them through WhatsApp right now, like, hey, I'm at this workshop and I want to invite you guys, but it might be too late. But yeah, great. Awesome.
Yes. Venture Capital 101 is up next.
Sweet.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Deeply appreciated. Have a wonderful Friday and enjoy your weekends. And I look forward to being in touch soon. All right. Take care.